Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa. It's Thursday and apologize for being on Africa time today. Just had a massive electric storm here where for a few minutes everything just died. But hey, it's resurrected again. So very happy to hear that. Hello, Lisa D. Hello, everybody. And of course, welcome back to Dr. Dennis Carroll. How are you, Dr. Dennis? Hello, Charmaine.
I'm
Are you
doing
well?
okay.
Nice to see you again.
Been busy, incredible. Been doing a lot of podcasts here lately, but it's kind of the season for it. Definitely.
Yeah, it's we're having a very podcasty time, aren't we?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you and Jesse had a great show together, what, 2 weeks ago, yeah?
Yeah, we did talk. We hit vampires and werewolves that day. I'm going to get a little bit deeper into vampires today and voodoo.
Yeah.
Some of my own personal experiences is what we're going to go over today. But, Shanti, throughout the years, I've been sort of, I guess you could say, a professional monster hunter. I've had to hunt them, whatever kind they might be. And I did get paid for it once in a while, but I guess that makes me professional. But anyway, it's very interesting that, to me, the vampire is one of the most supernatural entities that there is. And it's fascinating. And of course, voodoo is, what I'm going to be relating today about it was born where you're at, up there, as a matter of fact. That's where its birthplace is. So
Yeah.
it is very fascinating and interesting too, and I've had a lot of cases with it as well. I know as far away from Africa where you're at as I am, I still get cases on voodoo, definitely. So it's kind of a worldwide thing. So we're going to get into that today, I think, a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that'll be cool. That'll be cool. Because I think there's so much of it surfacing at the moment. And, if you were born the way that I was, you this kind of stuff it wasn't real. So we didn't pay too much attention to it. I can't ever imagine or think about even having a monster under my bed. There was no such thing in my world. But the more I realize as a grandmother, the more these stories are true and real. But I would like to maybe ask you something, Dennis, before we go on to the voodoo, whatever side that we're going to be broaching on here. I'm very curious. We're seeing a lot of, at the moment, and I've done 1 or 2 shows on it as well. You're seeing a lot of like these movie actors and actresses, and you're getting these guys that are taking photographs of them, as well as, let's say, people from the past. The one I currently think of is Jeffrey Epstein and Isaac Newton. I mean, it's when you match the 2 sides of the faces together, it is unbelievable how similar that is. Well, it's not even similar. It's like the same features, similar markings, and there's a lot of them. Now, obviously, I believe that has to do with vampirism, okay, like the recycling of, like they hide, basically, through the vampirism. But I want to know how they do that. What is the science behind that? What is the technology behind these guys recycling themselves? Another common one is looking at Taylor Swift and the daughter or the granddaughter of Anton LaVey, Gina LaVey. I mean, you look at those 2 pictures, and also not just the similarity, but when you match a lot of them, the features match pretty much identically, right? So it's not like it's, I don't know. I would love to hear your take on that.
Well, I've kind of got 2 takes on that, definitely, for you. And I've been investigating a lot of that. I've been doing some deep research on some of this stuff. And I'll ask you a question. I'll give you a question for your question. Okay. And it is this: where's the best place to hide anything?
In plain
Out in the
sight.
open. Yeah, out in the open. That's the best place to hide it because people overlook it very easily. And if I were a vampire, I would realize that. Okay, that and if you could become a famous person like Epstein or Johnny Depp or anybody like that, and you are really a vampire that's who knows how old, you would hide yourself in plain sight. No, nobody would. People would overlook that. That's too smart. Now let me give you the second answer to that. I supposedly met a 200-year-old werewolf. Okay. And the 200-year-old werewolf told me this. I asked him, I said, how have you, are you immortal? Have you existed for 200 years, And he said he looked like he was like 35 years old, but he's 200 years old. I said, how have you done that? I mean, how have you existed? He said, well, it is part of having like a way of immortality, but it's also being very smart. Said stupid werewolves don't live that long. Okay. So what you're looking at are people who may be incredibly smart and they know how to pull the wool over our eyes and they know how to do this in plain sight and get away with it. But here's the most interesting thing of all, Shanty. The more I study this, the more research I do into witchcraft, and vampirism is directly tied into witchcraft, by the way. It has a very distinct tie to it. Okay, everything kind of goes back. Oh, that old saying, "All roads lead to Rome." All these kind of dark roads lead to witchcraft. Okay, and that's just the way that goes. And but to me, that's the fascinating part of it. It's all connected. It's got a connection to it. But if these people are really vampires and they're fooling us, to believe that. And I've heard rumors that, of course, Jeffrey Epstein is not really dead, and that would not surprise me. Okay, because there are certain things you can do in this world if you want to. If you've got enough money and power, you can do almost anything. It includes fake your own death. Okay, and what was going on that island? There, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you a little hint on something. Okay, about Jeffrey Epstein. And a lot of people getting sick of hearing that name, by the way. We hear so much. But anyway, he had a name for his bank account. What was it? Baal, B-A-A-L, the god Baal, or some people pronounce it Baal. Why was it named that? Okay, because guess what? The god Baal demands child sacrifice. And before you sacrifice a child, what do? You take away its innocence. You sacrifice its virginity, whether it's male or female, doesn't matter. That's what you do before you sacrifice it. What was he? And that is what he was supposedly doing on that island. Think about it. There's a lot of connections going on here.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you ever watched Jesse did a decode on Epstein Island, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. If you guys haven't watched that, it's in the playlist of Jesse the Botar. And we go through the decoding of inside the house, the pillars, the murals on the wall. Everything has a significance of how these guys use the innocence of a child. It's actually quite scary. But yeah, I agree. It is hiding in plain sight, and you can definitely see there are so many of them that have recycled. For me, it's always a thing of, again, the science behind it. What is the science behind it? I know they're doing it. It's not exactly cloning. I don't understand it to be cloning. To me, cloning would be something different. The whole adrenochrome harvesting thing, of course, that's vampirism as well. I mean, I think there's different types of vampirism, the way they get their blood, right? So,
absolutely. And what you're talking about here is sort of a supernatural replication thing going on.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can do that if you're a shapeshifter. But remember what we talk about with the vampires. And the stories I'm going to tell you today are related to that. I've got a couple of good stories for you here on voodoo and vampires. But you got to remember something about the vampire. The power of a vampire is in his glamour. His power to get you to see what he wants you to see. may not be
Sure.
necessarily what's really there. You know, that's the scary part about the vampire to me. You know, I remember seeing as a kid watching the old vampire movies. You know, Dracula would do his thing, and he would just stare you in the eyes, and you would be under his power. And that is part of vampirism. It's power, control, and power over things. Yeah, and that's what makes them so downright dangerous. No matter which way they come, if they're either sucking life out of you, or blood out of you, or energy out of you, whatever they're getting out of you. But you got to, someone remember, I'm going to make this point about, before we get into our subject today, about sacrifice. Okay, especially when it comes to human sacrifice, and it's been done by many cultures worldwide. Okay, human sacrifice is twofold. You sacrifice physically, and then you sacrifice spiritually when you do this, okay? And that's what that part comes about, the defilement of the child. And most of them are child sacrifices, okay? The defilement of the child, and then the physical sacrifice itself. So you've got two sacrifices going on here. You sacrifice them spiritually, and you sacrifice them physically, okay? I'm sure Jesse knows about this. This is what's done in these cults, okay? And this is where they acquire their power. So the forces you're dealing with are always twofold, physical and spiritual. And you got to look at that with the vampire and with voodoo and all this other stuff. It's not just physical in our world of physical world, but it's also spiritual, flowing into our spiritual physical realm, okay? And that's what we've got to look at and all that when it comes to that. But that's what makes these things so very interesting. And that's why I became a doctor of metaphysics. That is the study of these unseen things and how they affect the seen world around us, how the spiritual affects the physical, and vice versa. The physical can affect the spiritual. That's the way this goes. But that's what you got to look at when you deal with vampires and voodoo and stuff like that, and witchcraft. And what did I say about witchcraft before? What is simply, and you know this for well, there are different types of magic in this world. There are different types. You know, we've talked about the sex magic. We've talked about there's even candle magic. There's color magic. There's natural magic. That's my favorite. Natural magic is sort of made into this world. You know, that's how a seed can grow into a mighty oak tree, or animals know how to build a nest and all this. This is real natural magic. Witchcraft taps into all these different types of magic. And what it seeks to do is change the reality of them, okay? And when you change the reality, you're really going against the laws of nature. You're saying, I don't have a better my way. You're just all about control. That's all it comes down to, control and changing stuff, okay? And you can live your life two ways. You can live your life wanting to go around controlling everything, or you can just flow with it, okay? I would rather flow with it, thank you, okay? It's a whole lot easier when you flow with it than when you stand around trying to control it and people and everything around you. Bad things are going to happen when you do that, okay? And that's where witchcraft, you know, that's why witchcraft is kind of bad, because it does that thing in a bad way. And it can cause bad things to happen. And but I like to go with the flow. I'd rather go with the flow. But anyway, and by the way, we're going to do a show very soon, if you want to, on the middle part of where you're at there, the Congo. There is the largest swamp there in the world. It's as big as the United States of America, by the way, right in the middle of Africa. And I know there's like giant spiders, snakes, and doggone dinosaurs still left in that place. We're going to have to do a show on that one day. Fascinating subject. But anyway, getting back to vampires and voodoo. I've had a lot of voodoo cases over the years. I've had a lot of vampire cases that crop up. And I'm going to relate a couple of them to you today. Back many, many, many years ago, and I'm not going to say how many years ago, but it's been a long time, okay? When I was 16 years old, my aunt, who was my mother's sister, married a fellow who was in the Navy, okay? And he was stationed at the naval base in Charleston, South Carolina, which is called the Holy City. I have been to Charleston many times. A fascinating place. The reason they call it the Holy City is because it has so many churches in it, you know. And as a side note, I have a lot of people ask me from time to time, where can I go find demons at? I said, well, you really don't want to go looking for them, but if you do, you're probably going to find most of them in church. That's where they hang out. A lot of them hang out in churches. Right. Yeah, they hang out in graveyards. They hang out in places like that. That's their hangout. But, and I think that may be one of the reasons why Charleston is so haunted, very haunted. But it has a lot of dark history to it. Piracy, vampirism, voodoo, the whole works in that city. Okay, very much like New Orleans on a smaller scale. Anyway, she married this guy, and she was married to him, and she was by herself in a strange city, and she wanted, somebody to come stay with her. So I volunteered to spend a week with her, in Charleston. Well, being the, which I did, that helped her out a lot, and I'm sure it put her, at ease. Matter of fact, she had me come back 2 or 3 times, okay, and then stay with her, to keep her from being lonely by herself and all that, And she had a small baby at the time too, so I helped out a little bit with that. So, being a good nephew, okay. But anyway, I had back in my younger years. Well, I've always been an adventurous spirit. Okay, I've always been one who liked to go out on adventures, shall we say. So every night, unbeknown to my aunt and uncle who was stationed at this Navy base, every night after midnight, I would slip out the window. Okay, and I would visit the neighborhood. Okay? I would just walk around and see things because I was in a new place, I guess, and it was interesting to me, And I had a lot of different adventures. I won't go into that day in this area doing that. But every night, from night to night, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep while I was there, okay? Every night I would slip out and do something. So one night I slipped out and was looking around, and I remember there was an old 7-Eleven store that was like about a mile or so away from where we were at, 7-Eleven convenience store. And I went there and I said, well, I'm going to go there and hang out a little bit, So I go to the 7-Eleven store. And I'm hanging out. I think I might have bought some cigarettes or something. I don't know what I was doing. I was messing around. And I ran into a fellow that was there. He was a young boy. He's probably about a year older than me. Okay. And we were standing, and 7-Eleven closed. Okay. Like at midnight, it closed. The convenience stores stay open all the time now. But back in the day, they would close about midnight or 1, something like that. And the store closed, so we were standing outside of the store talking, and as if you talk to me soon, sooner or later, I'm going to come up with some paranormal thing here, okay? And so I mentioned to the guy, hey, I've always, been interested in ghost stories. I've had some experiences myself, He said, oh, really? He said, I am too. I've been interested. He said, would you like to see something really scary? And I said, well, yeah, what are you talking about? He said, well, tonight there's a full moon, Sure enough, there's a big full moon. He said, I know they're out doing what they do because there's a full moon. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'd rather show you than tell you. Are you game? Are you ready? I said, yeah, sure, So he leaves. So we walk off, we go about maybe a half a mile, and there's a dirt road that comes off on the main highway, dirt road that goes way off in the woods, and what is going into the marshlands, there's a lot of seawater that, like a swamp, but it's marsh. Okay, it's the marsh. And I'm thinking, what am I, got myself in for? What's this guy doing? Where are we going? And he told me, he said, now look, you got to do exactly what I tell you to. Absolutely. He said, this is real serious. He said, if you don't, we could both get killed. Okay. And I'm thinking, God, what's he doing? What are we going to see here? I said, I'll do what you say, And he said, okay, here's what we got to do. He said, and we come to this hill, like off in a field, and the marshlands were over here, and we're not that far from the coast here. I mean, we're very close, to the ocean. And there's a hill, and I'm going to say, it's not a real big hill, but it's a pretty good sized hill. He says, now, Says, you and I are going to get on our bellies right now. We're going to crawl up this hill. And said, I want you to see what's on the other side of this hill. I said, oh, this is crazy, you know. So we do it, and we crawl like, you know, like in an old soldier movie, we crawl up the hill. And the reason he said we crawl up the hill says we don't want to be seen against the skyline. We don't want them to see us. And I'm saying, what are you talking about, you know? He said, just be quiet and watch, okay? And he said, when I tell you to leave, we got to leave. So we crawl up this hill, you know, and we get to the top of the hill, we get to the very top of the hill, and we're overlooking an area down in here it's a clear area like a glade, okay? And in this glade is a big fire going in the middle of it. I mean, a huge bonfire going. And there are people standing around. I'm saying, what the world's going on here, you know? And what I didn't know at that time, there was a voodoo ceremony. I mean, the real thing, you can go to certain tourist areas and they'll put on a voodoo show for you. This was the real deal, okay? And a great big fire going in, and they're beating drums. They're doing drum things and all this. And I'm watching. And what he told me, he said, now you got to keep low. We don't want them to see us, because if they see us, they will kill us. They'll probably do something to us. We probably won't live, okay? They will unalive us. So I'm very quiet watching this, okay? And maybe we were there, I won't say, maybe about an hour, okay? The whole thing. But this was fascinating to me, watching this, because they were like dancing around this fire. And there were mostly women dancing around this fire. There were mostly black people, but there were a couple look like that were either some white people mixed in, but not very many. There was mostly predominantly black, okay? And they were like dancing around this fire, moving around it and chanting and doing stuff, you know. And I'm going, God, this is wild. And I said, I'd always heard about voodoo, but never seen it, you know, before. This was something new to me. So I'm watching, fascinated at this, you know, and the more they dance, the faster they get, and they start contorting their bodies and doing weird stuff and screaming and stuff. Okay, and I don't know what they're saying, because I'm not really close up to this. Okay, I'm about probably, I'd say maybe 40 yards away, maybe 40 or 50 yards from this, but close enough for them to see us. If they were to have looked up on top of that hill, they would have seen us, definitely. But that's why we were laying low. We were mixing in with the hill, okay? That was smart. And we're laying there, and I'm watching this stuff, and they start screaming and talking in weird language or whatever they're doing. And I found out later what they were doing in voodoo. They were actually calling spirits into themselves. And when they call these spirits into themselves, they get possessed by these spirits. And the spirits will cause them to do weird movements and dancing and all that stuff. And I'm watching this, you know, fascinated, because I've never seen anything like it in my life, you know. I said, wow, you know, this is crazy stuff. And once in a while, some of the women would open their blouses, you know, and all this stuff. And I'm going, wow, I mean, God, are they getting naked down here or what? You know, it was really weird to me, and I was fascinated by this. And so, about midway through this, somebody enters in the middle of this ceremony. It's a tall man, and he's got on a top hat. And his face is painted like a skull face. And I didn't know it at the time, but this is Baron Samedi, or Baron Saturday, as some people call him. Baron Samedi is a voodoo god spirit that supposedly oversees graveyards and a lot of spiritual transference. I won't go deep into his explanation, but Baron Samedi is well known. Okay, smokes a cigar. He looks like a mortician or somebody that, you know, would work, you know, with a funeral home or something. But he's got the hat on, he's got the top hat. And I'm going, God, this is getting better, you know. This is wild. And he's like painted like a skull, you know. And I can see this in the fire. And he walks around and touches each one of them, these women. And every time he touches one of them, they'll fall out. They just fall down. And finally, the whole circle's laying on the ground. They're still moving. They're still doing this. Well, finally, the boy taps me on the shoulder, said, we got, let's go. He didn't speak because they could have heard us, okay? We're that close. He tapped me on the shoulder, like, come on, let's go. I didn't want to leave, but I left. I find we crawled back down the hill and all that. And so he said, what do you think about that? I said, wow, my mind is blown. I never thought about this stuff like this before, as well. He said, I've seen them do this on a few times. He says, I live not that far away back over in here. And I hear the drums sometimes at night. And one night I came out here to see what was going on. And this is what I found. He said, I wanted you to see it too. He said, but we had to be careful because if they'd have caught us there, that would have been the end of us probably. We never would have been seen again. But that was my very first voodoo experience. Okay. And at the age, I think it was about 16 years old.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible that you actually got to witness that. I'm surprised they didn't sense you there, because with all those spirits and entities they work with, I'm surprised that, they weren't alerted.
We were very lucky, I think.
Yeah.
They get away. And like I said, we didn't stay there. Maybe it was an hour that we were there. We weren't there that long, really. Might have seemed like an hour.
Was a long time.
That long to me, but we were incredibly lucky to get away from there. Definitely.
Wow, Dennis.
But I've been known to do stupid things like that. It was like the time that I took in on a black mass.
What you do? You put on a black mask.
No. I didn't really want to participate in it, but it was fascinating to watch from a sort of an anthropological point of view, and that got me at that young age. I said, I've got to, investigate this more. I got to find out what those people were doing down there, and so I got deep into studying what voodoo was and why it's how it was practiced, and the different types of voodoo that there are. There's many different types.
Sure.
There's African voodoo, there's Haitian voodoo, and the list goes on. There's different types. But it's a fascinating subject because to me, I said, what these human beings, this belief system that these human beings were doing and engaging in, and why would you allow spirits from the outside inside of you? That's not good either. That's dangerous. The way to do things, Yeah. So it's very fascinating stuff. But it kind of opened my mind that night to say, hey, God, there's a whole lot more to this world than I really truly realized was going on, and this was right here,
Was that actually the event that got you to investigate voodoo more? That 16-year-old experience where you were taken to witness that?
Yeah, that kind of got me interested in studying that, and along with other subjects connected to that. That's why I became, a student of divinity and theology and philosophy to understand these things. And anthropology is one of my favorite subjects. The belief systems that people have, and the different superstitious type beliefs that they have. The list goes on and on. Human beings are fascinating creatures. They're some of the most fascinating things on this planet, okay? And the way they do stuff is amazing. But that's what kind of set me that night on the road. I'd already had, at this point in my life, several supernatural experiences. I knew there was something else other than this world and what you can see with your own eyes. I knew that existed. I've always kind of known that to a certain extent. But to be able to see something like that firsthand, that really, blew my mind that night. And it wanted me to, it kind of lit that fire under me to know more about this stuff. And
you were also in the police force, because in the police force, you would have also encountered, I would imagine, most definitely the occultic side of things. There would have been lots of that. So exactly, you would have also had
Yeah, later
first-hand
on, I remember
experience
one
and
time
knowledge
that
of
we
that.
actually were called to this house. I mean, it was way out in the country. And as soon as I stepped up on the porch, I knew there was something different about this house because most houses you have wind chimes on the porch. You know, maybe you got some wind chimes. They have wind chimes with chicken claws hanging here, you know, and feathers on it. I thought, oh God, that's not good. Okay, that's definitely some voodoo or something like that going on here in this house, you know. So. So the other cop I was with, he looked at that too and said, well, why in the world? He didn't know anything about that, you know. You know, why in the world would you hang chicken feet out here, you know? And I said, well, there's a reason for that, okay? I said, this is definitely somebody who lives here knows voodoo or is engaged in that. We were sent there to actually notify somebody about somebody was trying to reach them, but there was nobody at that house. The house was deserted. But when I saw that, I it's not good. That's not good, you know. And so there were times when, as a policeman, as a law enforcement officer, my kind of interest overlapped with that. You know, there was that time that I was called to an old abandoned mill. I think I told you about that. That something very bad had gone wrong in the basement, and it was a demon raising circle down there, a pentagram, and it was broken. You never want to break the circle. And it was broken, and there was blood everywhere, and all that stuff. And I knew something. And by looking at the other policeman with me, he just wanted to leave. Okay, he didn't know what was going on. But I'm sitting there. I said, "Wait a minute, I'm gonna look at this," you know, because I recognized by the signals in the pentagram that this was not an amateur. This was somebody that knew what they were doing here, okay? It wasn't some kid playing around with something reading out of a book. This was the real deal. And something had very badly gone wrong in this because the seal was broken. The ward was messed up. And when you raise a demon, you raise it from inside that circle. You don't raise it from the outside. The demon now appears outside because they're all around us, okay? But your protection is in that circle. If you break that circle, that star, you got a bad problem because the demon can get to you then, okay? And something very badly went wrong with that. And here's the weird thing about that, Shanty. You know, I went back and told the guard, I said, I have some kids messing around down there. I said, but if you see anybody else around here, you call me. I give him my card. You call me immediately. I'll be back. Because I wanted to see if somebody came back to that room, you know. But I never got a call because 2 weeks later, that whole mill burnt down to the ground. It was gone. And you know what? In my career, I've seen houses, I've seen locations, I've seen buildings that do that. It's almost as if there's so much evil connected to them that they can't exist any longer. Somehow or another, some lightning strikes them or some kind of weird fire takes them out. Same thing happened with several different sites I knew about at the time in that town. There was one house that was supposedly very badly demon infested. It burned down one day. I mean, burned down completely into nothing. So it's almost as if these dark and evil places can't exist for very long. You know, Aleister Crowley's house burned down, by the way, that he lived in. You have to wonder about that. Do they spiritually stain a place so bad that, you know, it messes the very equilibrium of it up in our world, you know, in our existence.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously fire is very powerful. I mean, energy, you know, that destroys, but it also renews. You know, if you just look at felt fires, what do you call it there? You know, when they burn the fields down to the end of a season so that new crops can grow. So there's a positivity in that as well. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that would be part of the renewal process, right? Is that when these really nasty, you know, demonic places get burnt down.
Yeah. That makes sense when you think about it, you know. You know, and it might be sort of like a natural thing built into the world, you know. It reaches a certain point, it renews itself that way. But that was one of my very first experiences in Charleston, which was a very interesting city. And what I'm going to relate next is one of that was many years after this experience. Okay, this was many years later, and I have been to Charleston many times. I have done a lot of investigations there, had a lot of experiences there, and it's like I say, a fascinating city. Well, another haunted city, very much like it, not that far away, is Savannah, Georgia. By the way, Savannah is a beautiful city, and it has a very haunted reputation too. But in my book, just my own personal opinion, Charleston's haunted more than Savannah is, because Charleston has a darker history, especially with pirates, piracy, and all that. But the story I'm going to relate to you now was one of my very first. And of course, maybe it was after I had that experience with the vampire girl in the graveyard I told you about. You remember me telling you about that story? That's the story I get asked about a lot. People want me to tell that story a lot. But this happened afterwards. Okay, this was on another investigation years later. And I talked to a lady. I remember now. I think it was in a restaurant or something. I just got to talking to her. I think she was like a waitress there. Okay. And I got to talking to her, and like I say, you talk to me for very long. I get on that subject of the paranormal. Okay, sooner or later it comes up. Mostly sooner than later. Okay, but I happened to mention that to her. She said, "Well, you would." She said, "I would love to tell you sometime about my grandmother." Okay, she said my grandmother had a very interesting experience with vampires. And I said, "Really?" Yeah. And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, look." She said, "Well, look." She said, "I'm getting off, shift here in a few minutes. I'll come back to the table and tell you." I said, "Yeah, sure. I want to hear this, And so she came back. It was a real nice black lady. She was real pretty, and young. She probably I guess probably in the maybe mid late 20s or something like that. She was very, very upbeat person, And so she came back to the table and sat down and said, "Let me tell you about my grandmother." She said, "My grandmother's dead now. She's been gone. She said my grandmother died like 10 years ago. But she told me this before she died. And it blew my mind." Okay. And I said, "Okay, I want to hear it, definitely." And I wish at that time I had a tape recorder. I would have taped it, but I'm going from memory now. And she said my grandmother worked for a family, and then they had a house right on the outskirts of Charleston City. It's a plant like it was part of an old plantation once upon a time. And I'm going to call it the Marsh House. Okay, I can't tell you its real name because they people living there would object to me doing that. But I'm going to call it the Marsh House. Okay, she said that my grandmother worked at the Marsh House for 40 years. She was like the maid, the cook. She ran the place. She said my grandmother was a very smart woman. Okay. And Mrs. Marsh, who owned the house, was like 90 years old when this happened, when this took place. She said she was at least 90 years old, Mrs. Marsh was. And said Miss Marsh had two daughters, Emmeline and Abigail. And Emmeline and Abigail were their names, and they were like 25 or 26 years old. One of them was like 1 year older than the other. They weren't twins, but they were like, one year, about a year or two older than the other one. She said they were very pretty, and they had kind of dark hair and kind of pale looking. And here's their story. It's very interesting. Okay, so then the Marsh House. Miss Marsh depended upon her grandmother for everything, to run the house and everything. And Miss Marsh had a very strange quirk. Okay. The Marsh daughters, and these were her daughters. Now stop and think about this a moment. And this is what got me. I said, wait a minute, you're messing up on this story here. This 90-year-old woman has 20-year-old daughters? That's not possible, I mean, how can that be possible, Did she have them when she was like 60 years old? That's not possible. What's going on with this? She said, just listen to the story, okay? I said, okay. So she said Miss Marsh was 90 years old and said that she had some very weird quirks about her. And the weird thing about the daughters, they never left their room. They had a room. They lived in one room together in the house, Emmeline and Abigail. And she said they never left the room. They didn't come down. They took their meals up there. They stayed up there. And Miss Marsh, when he said, well, where's Emmeline and Gabby? I said, oh, they're up there. They're sewing. They're doing some sewing or something, you know. They're doing stuff, you know. And here's the weird thing. He said once a month, Miss Abigail, Miss Marsh would have someone come to the house with a goat, a live goat. Okay, and once a month, she would buy a goat and would deliver it to this house. And the maid, you know, the grandmother, the girl's grandmother said, this is weird. What are you doing with a goat? You know, we got plenty of milk. We don't need eating goat food or anything, you know. What's going on with the goat here? But she never asked. She said, I kept my place. I did not ask. It was not my place to ask. That's what the grandmother would keep telling her, you know, the granddaughter. It was not my place to ask. She didn't ask anything, didn't ask any questions. But Miss Marsh would buy this goat once a month. She had a goat delivered to her house. And she would take the goat upstairs. And you would not see it again. Okay, you got me so far? And she said, she didn't ask any question about this, but this was the weirdest thing the grandmother had ever seen, you know. And this went on. 40 years she worked for this woman, okay? And this went on. And here's the weird thing. She said she would see those daughters once in a while. She would have to go to their room and get a tray or something, you know. And she would only see them at night. And they never aged. The 40 years, they never got any older than 24 years old. And she said this went on 40 years while she worked. And finally, you know, she was going to retire. The grandmother said, I'm retired, time for me to retire. I'm getting old too. And Miss Marsh was 90 years old at the time. And finally said one day, Miss Marsh, they found her dead in the drawing room downstairs, dead in her chair. She had died sometime during the night. Okay. And so the grandmother called the authorities. You know, she did what was right. The policemen come to the house. They checked everything out. And they said, well, you know, anybody else in the house? And she said, yeah, there's 2 daughters upstairs, you know. And the policeman said, well, I'll go up there and bring them down here. And we're gonna have to see what, you know, if they know anything about this, you know, because she just evidently she didn't have any marks or anything on her, but she was, you know, they have to investigate, they have to look into it, you know. And they had called the coroner, and the coroner had come. And so the policeman come back downstairs and said, there's nobody up there. I looked in every room up there. There's nobody there. And I looked in the attic. There's nothing there. Where are these 2 daughters at? And the grandmother says, well, I'm not lying to you. I've worked here 40 years. I've fed them. You know, I brought food up. I've seen them. They're real. They exist. You mean they're not there anymore? And he said, no, I looked at so the grandmother went with them and looked. There's nothing. The only person in this house is the dead Mrs. Marsh. All right, Miss Marsh is dead, and the maid and the grandmother. That's it. There's nobody else. And so she said it was a mystery to her grandmother, and her grandmother told her at the end. And said, you know what? Said, I believe without a doubt that those 2 daughters were some kind of vampires. They didn't age. You know, all the time I was there, they didn't age. Every time I see them, they looked the same. It wasn't makeup or anything. They looked the same. You know, she said, I kind of know I know what I saw. And she told her granddaughter, she said, the only thing I can explain that with is that they were some kind of something that wasn't human. And she said, and I think that goat was what they fed on once a month. And not the goat itself, but its blood. She said because it went up the stairs and never came back down. But she thought that, here's the weird thing about it. She said she had seen places out in the backyard that were like graves. were they burying the dead goats every month? You know, or what was left of them? Okay, that might have been part of it too. So I'm listening to this story. I go, God dang, this is fascinating. Two vampires, okay, living in the house. All right, so I got to go check this out. You know, I got to go check this out. But she said, but here's the last thing she said about her grandmother before I get to that. She said, well, grandmother, this don't seem possible. You know, this just doesn't seem real. You know, something somebody would make up. She said, it's true. God is my witness. This is true. She said, but she said, granddaughter, just remember, there's more to this world than you realize. And so that was the last thing, you know, she ever talked about it with her grandmother on that. But that was the only thing. So her grandmother didn't want to talk about it anymore after that. But said that's what happened with the Marsh house. So I said, dang, I've got to go check this Marsh house out. You know, I got to go check this out. And so I actually, you know, when she told me where was that, I actually went there. Okay. I went there and it looked like it was, you know, there was somebody living in it now. Of course, it may have passed on to somebody else in the family or whatever. You know, there was somebody living in there. But what about the Marsh girls? Where are they at? Are they still wandering the world out there somewhere? And they're not feeding on goats anymore? You know, I have to wonder about that.
They may have recycled themselves into something else, because the vampires are also shapeshifters, aren't they? So
yeah. Well,
maybe that's
it was like, maybe, you know, they had their safe house. They had a safe house, and when the mother died, that was the end of their safe house, and they went on out in the world to do what they wanted to. That's what I figured. But let me tell you one more thing. I don't know if you uploaded that thing I sent you. I found there's like a brick wall around the facade of this. Okay,
this thing.
I found that mark on the wall a little further down, and I put it in my notebook. I said, I gotta figure out what this is. What is that mark? You know. And so I did some research, deep research on that, and it was very archaic mark. It wasn't anything found in witchcraft. I found out exactly what that mark means. Okay, are you ready for this? And whoever put it there, and it was in red too, by the way. It was in red. It was on the wall, the outside fence wall, okay, of this house, of this, you know, estate. And it was faded out. It was not very, you know, it was not new. It was faded. It had been there for looked like a good many years. I found out that that's a V with an X. You know what it means? No vampires here. It's a vampire hunter's mark. It means no vampires here. Somebody else had been there checking that house out.
Wow. So that must have been like a vampire stronghold, though, if they're even putting signs like that up.
One more thing I forgot to tell you, that the grandmother had told the granddaughter that many years when she first started to work there, the daughters were kind of normal. Okay. They were like, you know, that's why she saw them more. She didn't, you know, after she continued to stay there and work, she didn't see them as much anymore. You know, just taking their plate, you know, the tray up there to them. Mrs. Marsh would tell them, take them a tray, you know, take them a tray up there, tea. And it was never like a big food. It was never a big meal. It was just like, you know, maybe some, you know, cookies and some tea or something. It was never nothing that you could live on. You know what I'm saying? And that was the weird thing. But here's the weird thing. Said that when she first went to work there, when Miss Marsh was like in her 60s with these two or something like that, way back when she first went to work there was a party that had been there. And she said, Miss Marsh, the old Miss Marsh, kept grumbling and talking about this man, that man that caused everything. That caused everything. That's what she would say. They caused all the trouble. Who was that man? Was it a vampire that bit those girls or what? You know, I have to wonder about that too. What is the untold story behind all of this? You know, of course, unfortunately, we'll probably never know. But it was a fascinating thing to think about, that how vampirism could infect a family.
Right.
You know, and do that. Yeah. That's wild.
It fascinates me to think about where they could have gone, though. You know, if you look at the girls, I mean, and from what I've heard from various guests, etc., including yourself, it's like vampires are shapeshifters, right? So they can shapeshift. So did they shapeshift into the sisters and come there to feed like once a month and then disappear off back into the ethers again and do their vampire hunting, whatever vampires do, and then come back again to kind of recover? So I'd be interested to know what they would have been doing. I mean, what do they do the rest of the time? You know, when we're looking at vampires, really, we told that the most powerful people in the world are vampires, literally like bona fide vampires rule the world. I don't have any hard evidence on that, but I'm quite prepared to give that, okay, I'll look at that for sure, because it makes a lot of sense, right? Because of the power. But people that transition into vampirism, like into becoming vampires, etc. Like if you look at these two women, what do they do? Where do they go the rest of the time? It's like, where are they? Do you know what I mean, Dennis? It's one thing being a vampire because you like sucking people's blood and the taste of blood, but it's another thing existing in an everyday life. How do you exist? What do you do in an everyday life as a vampire?
I think there's that when you look at vampires, I mean, the real vampires, not the people that want to be vampires, like, you know, in some of these vampire societies. I call them the human vampires, by the way. The inhuman vampires, you got to look at them as being, like I said earlier, you got the spiritual aspects of this universe that go into the physical world. Okay, so the vampire exists in both the spiritual and the physical realm at one time, and sometimes. And I think that, according to a lot of legend, they're supposed to lie dormant during the day, and their power is more at night, more prevalent at night. And that is a spiritual thing, because I have seen that my own self dealing with demonic spirits, that their power, and listen to this, it's very interesting, their power reaches its height at 3 a.m. in the morning. At 3 a.m., that's the real witching hour, by the way. That's the real hour of the devil, as some people call it. 3 a.m., because it mocks the very hour when Christ died at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Okay, it's the opposite of it. But here's the interesting thing I've noted, and I tell people, I've mentored a lot of people over the years, a lot of groups and stuff. I say, look for this, okay? Because when you're dealing with these forces, like the vampire, which is a spirit, in many aspects it is spiritual, okay? More so than physical in some ways. But it is inhabiting our physical world, okay? And it can have physical attributes to it. That's the weird part about it. There's some molecular change going on here, okay? But here's the interesting thing about with the demonic. At 3 a.m., they reach the height of their power, and then they slowly begin to get weaker. And by 5 a.m., they're pretty weak. They've lost a whole lot of their power. And I kept wondering about this. What's going on with that? And then it dawned on me. Finally, one of those light bulb moments. That's the hour, 5 o'clock, is when the earth itself turns back towards the sun.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I said, oh, that's what's going on here. I don't know whether they're on Eastern time or Central time, whatever time they're on there. But I'm just saying they realize that. And demons do not usually overtly operate in the light of the sun, and neither do vampires. And like that vampire girl I met in Charleston, I said, what are you doing out in the daytime? So we can go out in the daytime. Only when the sun's not shining very much. Only when it's kind of a dark, overcast day, we come out, because we're more powerful in darkness. Mm-hmm. And that's what these things are. They are spiritual darkness, and they thrive on that spiritual darkness, okay? And they thrive on the spiritual darkness. And here's the weird thing, okay, Shanty, I want you people watching today to realize this. there is an inherent spiritual darkness in all of us. It's part of our makeup as human beings. Okay, there's a darker side to us all, or as I think Abraham Lincoln called it, the evil angels of our nature. We have good angels of our nature and the evil angels of our nature. Okay, that's a good way of explaining like a Jekyll and Hyde thing here. Okay, and we got to realize that we do. And the darkness inherent in this world, the very evil, darkness, the really bad guys, like to always hook up with that darkness in us. Okay, because then that makes them stronger and it gives you more darkness. So when you give yourself over completely to that darkness, you lose your humanity. That's what we call losing your soul. Okay, that's what makes you human, your soul. Okay. And all living things, I think, have a soul, but we're talking about human soul here. Okay. Now, if your soul gets completely dark, you have lost your true humanity. You're no longer really truly human. And the deeper you go into that darkness, the less human you are. And if you are like a vampire, like somebody, and I'm not saying Johnny Depp is a vampire or Nicolas Cage. I met Nicolas Cage one time. He was a nice guy, okay? He wanted to talk about comic books mostly. He was really nice. Kind of weird, but he was nice. I got weird vibes from him, okay? But I don't know. Anyway, when you think about these people, what if they really are something other than what they are appearing to be? Like the Marsh Girls, okay? They looked human, but were they really still human anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about the vampire. That's what you don't know what you're dealing with on that, you know? And what degree of spiritual you're dealing with over the physical part of it. But I have had a lot of dealings with that spiritual world. It is real. It is even, in my opinion, even more real than the physical world around us. Okay? In some ways. I know that's a weird thing to say, but it's true. And it does affect us in different ways, though, and can bleed over into our physical world when it wants to. And when it does, that's when it becomes even more dangerous. Because now it can affect you not only physically and spiritually as well, okay? And that's what you got to watch out for when you deal with these things. And I have had a lot of dealings with vampire spirits over the years. I had, I told you that. I think you might remember me telling you that story about the woman that had one put on her by a voodoo priestess. She had a vampire spirit put on her. It was sucking the life out of this woman. This woman was dying. All because she accepted a small bottle of some kind of black liquid from this voodoo priest. Don't ever do that. Don't ever take things from people that you don't know what they are, okay? And when I first heard this, that woman told me this, because this voodoo priestess this Mama Loa was living next door, okay? Across the street next door, yeah. And she said, she gave me this thing. Said, "Here, honey, you take this, and this is going to, give you good luck, and then, it'll draw money to your house, Yeah, it drew something else besides money, okay? And so I told that woman when she told me that, I said, let me see that bottle. Oh, I threw it away. I thought, I wish you hadn't done that. We could have worked with this, okay? If you hadn't done that, because it was a voodoo fetish, okay? That, and in order for them to place the spell, if I'm a witch, I don't care whether I'm voodoo or what, in order for me to really curse you, Shanty, I got to leave something in your house or on your person. Okay? That's the way it works.
Property,
got to be on your property or on your person, okay? That's why I say be careful what you take from other people, okay? It may not be good. May not be good stuff, Anyway, I have even had people come to me and say, I took $1 bill or something one day and I got rid of it. It felt like it was evil. I said, well, you did the good right thing, no matter what, because if it's something evil attached to it, you don't need it, okay? But we got to understand these things in it. So, and when I found out that this woman had been cursed by this Mama Loa, I said, I know, light bulb moment again. I know what's going on here. She's put a vampire spirit on you. And I said, we got to get this, we got to cleanse your house and we got to cleanse you. Okay. And get this vampire spirit out of here. And I want to tell you, and I was starting, and here's the weird thing. I did pray for the woman, I helped the woman out, But I said, let's do your house first. You know, you do the house first, then we do you. Okay. And I started down the stairs in the basement of this house and to throw holy water out, okay, and begin the process of cleansing this house. And something almost knocked me down on the stairs. There's another guy with me. He saw it as a shadow. I just felt it as a wind go by me. And when it went by us, all of a sudden upstairs was this loud bam, big noise. Well, I knew what happened then. The demon, whatever it was, spirit had left that house. They never leave in a good way.
Yeah,
they never leave in
some kind of a ruckus.
They always knock something over. They scream. Or they make a noise or something when they leave. And I knew what had happened. So I went back upstairs. The woman said, what was that noise? I said, that was your trouble leaving. Okay. But anyway, that was the story with that. So I've had encounters with vampire spirits. Okay. And that's why I warn people, be careful who you let touch you, what things you take, what food you take from people, whatever the situation is, know that person well. Because if you don't, you're opening yourself up to some bad spiritual stuff that's in this world. It's going around from person to person, and people are using it. People in power use it. People in Hollywood, I definitely, you know, they're tapped into some of this stuff, okay? Without a doubt. And this darkness gives them power in the spiritual and physical world. Yes. That's why vampires supposedly can turn into bats, or they can turn into a mist. They can turn into rats. They have that shape-shifting ability because they are dark, supernatural beings. But hey, on the flip side, angels, the good angels are supposed to do that too. They can shape-shift too. This is a spiritual thing going on here, okay? That you need to understand is a real thing that happens in this world from time to time. But that's the fascinating things about vampires, you know. They walk that line between the physical and the spiritual realm. They walk two worlds and not one.
Yeah. Yep. That's definitely, and I think that's what gives them their power, actually, because they are masterful at bringing the two together and getting what they want in the earthly existence. I don't know what happens outside of the earth, right? I'm sure they've got their ways and means of doing things there as well. But that combination here is what gives them their power, because it's not what the average human being is operating on. You know, we're still very much in the stage of evolving spiritually as well. And when you have powerful beings like that, it's like having a big brother hit his baby sibling before he can even talk and sort of thumping him into submission. You know what I'm saying? And that, I think, is where we have to grow. That's what gets us out of that. We speak about that all the time, right?
Yeah, I found that out, especially when I experienced it with the voodoo and all that. They were allowing these spirits into them to do things. It's a spiritual connection thing going on here. Okay, that's what's going on with that. But also, I found out years later that in witchcraft, a supreme witch or warlock, as the case may be, even male or female, can go either way, don't they? Can have what's called a familiar spirit. The Bible talks about that a lot. The familiar spirit. What is a familiar spirit? It's your demon buddy. It helps you out and does things for you. The power of the witch is not just the power from within, but they use the power from without as well. Okay, that's what they're plugging into. A dark power that's without, that connects with the dark power within them. Okay, and when those two connections get together, things happen. Okay, and you can manipulate the material world around you. Okay, and the spiritual aspects of it too. But if you have this familiar spirit, you get things done. I've actually had people tell me, "Oh yeah, I got a demon buddy. He does, he's my best friend. He does what he gives me things and I give him things." But they require some very bad things, okay? That's just the way they work. But this is where the power of a dark witch comes from, of a dark evil witch. She plugs into that familiar spirit. And the familiar spirit is not, now don't get me wrong here, okay? A familiar spirit does not possess you. It may ride your back like a monkey, okay? but it does not possess you. I'm not talking about a demon possession here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about something that around you, an influence that comes around you, and it can stay around you in the form of an animal, like a cat or a dog or goat or donkey or whatever it wants to. That can be your familiar, and you see this crop up in the witchcraft trials a lot. Oh, Sarah Jane, she had a black pig. That was her familiar. Okay. So the spirit would say, I'm going to hang out with you, Shanty, and be your familiar, but I need to hang out so nobody can see me, so I'll, hang out as your dog or something, I'll hang out around your house as your dog or something. And that's the way it supposedly went on that way. But that's what a familiar spirit does. And a lot of people who are deep into dark occultic things have this familiar spirit, this demon monkey on their back, okay? It is not a possession, but an attachment in your life.
Exactly.
Okay? And if it is a bad thing going on here, it can very badly affect you in many ways.
Sure.
It can even lead to suicide eventually. These are dark spiritual forces at work. Be very careful how you handle these things, because they can be very dangerous if you're not careful.
Wow. And I think that makes, a lot of sense what you're saying as well about the familiar spirit. It's more of an attachment or a external force or entity that kind of influences you or encourages you or gets you to get up to mischief, that sort of thing. So, but either way, I think it's no matter how these things attach or enter us in whatever way, the bottom line is still, if we give them access, they're going to get in, and it doesn't matter what it is or how or who. If you are open and accessible, whatever's in your vicinity and needs a taxi for the day or the month or the year is going to find you. So yeah, but wow, what an interesting conversation. So thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge yet again. I really like the idea, by the way, of what you were saying at the beginning of the show for one of our next shows, maybe the next one, is the swamps in the DRC, the Congo. With the giant creatures there. I know there's huge spiders in that place. And also when you look at that place, the DRC has been one of the greatest. The DRC, by the way, is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congo in North Africa, whatever, where you got to know that's where all the child mining is, the child trafficking, where the cobalt is mined, uranium, all of the stuff that we use for the cell phones, electric cars, all of that comes from the DRC. And that's why that area is under such siege and attack from the West, because they want the resources there to begin with. And secondly, spiritually, there are huge spiritual, that whole area, Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, that whole area up there is a huge, it's on an amazing spiritual portal, energy ley line, whatever it is. I don't know exactly what it is, but which has made that area such a target for attack.
Also,
and for theft.
Also, there's a political force still at work in the Congo, the leopard men. You remember me telling you about the leopard men, which was a cult, by the way, the leopard men. And they are still in the background. They have never been wiped out. Colonial Britain tried to wipe them out and failed miserably at it. And they are still a political force in the Congo. Although they're just sort of like a secret society, okay? But they are still a political force in the background of a lot of decisions that are being. So there's no wonder there's child trafficking going on and all this other stuff, because there is, as bright as the Congo is, there is a dark side to it, a very dark side. And And wherever you have these secret societies, these cults and all that, you're going to have child trafficking, whether it's from mining cobalt or whatever it may be, or whatever the purpose. Slavery still exists in this world. People don't realize, that's something from history. No. History still shows that slavery is a real thing in our society to this day, whether it be the sweatshops in China or the cobalt mines in the Congo, whatever the situation is, this is going on. It's still there. And the governments know it, but they're benefiting from it. Okay, they don't want to stop it. They're getting benefits from it. But the Congo, the swamp that I talked about, is a fascinating read. If anybody wants to look at some of that stuff up, you've got all kinds of legends in there, and we're going to definitely get into that very soon.
Cool. Look forward to that. Yeah, well, just on a side note, the British Commonwealth, British destroyed everything. If they didn't understand it, I mean, it's well known how they hunted the Khoisan people here as well when they arrived. The Khoisan were hunted relentlessly. And if you look at Australia, the Aboriginals were hunted. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anything that is not according to what they want is hunted, and it's because they were colonizers of the continent, so they took ownership of everything. But I think, again, when we look at everything before the corruption took place, everything has its place. Everything, if it's on earth and it's here by natural creation, even though it might not seem normal to you or I and 10,000 other people, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be here or that it doesn't deserve to be here. Penny Bradley spoke she's always said something very interesting. And, the whole thing is, until we're going to be on this planet, all of us, until we can learn how to live together and accept each other with our differences. And that's what we need to do, and not kill everything that doesn't align with what we think is right, or if we fear it, If you fear it, you kill it. Just kill it.
Yeah, that's what I have voiced that many times in some sermons. I'm also a minister, so I have done some sermons, and I always say that, what are we here for if we can't be here for each other? What's the purpose, And that's very true. If we don't look out for each other, it's like I've said this before, and we talk about colonization. That's all it is. Every land on this planet has been stolen by somebody at one time or another. Okay, and everybody's been somebody's slave at one time or another. This is unfortunately the track record of humanity. Okay, but we can be better than that. If we decide to, yes, we can rise above that. We can be here for each other. That's what counts,
Exactly. That's what's very important, is that we are here. We're just walking each other home, as Ram Dass says. We're just walking each other home. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you joining us. And we will see you back with Dr. Dennis in 2 weeks' time. And next week, the 15th of Feb, I think it's next week, we have J.R. Sweet as a guest as well, who's one of the monarch, that church with the M. What's the church with the M? Guys, I've hit a blank again. Grandma's brain is not functioning too well. But anyway, yes, we're interviewing J.R. Sweet next week, Thursday. Dennis, we'll see you back in 2 weeks' time again. Is there anything you'd like to share with our viewers, where they can find you, what you're up to, blah.
Yes, they can come on over to my channel, Hunting the Shadows. It's on YouTube, and just look up Hunting the Shadows on YouTube, and you can subscribe. We'd love to have you. And finally, I made over 2,000 subscribers. That was a big threshold for me, okay? So I appreciate that. And so come over there and visit me there. And also You can reach me if you need to reach me for anything. You got questions, you want to share something with me or what, I love to hear your story or whatever the situation. You can contact me at DennisWCarroll.com. That's my website, okay? And also my books are available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Just look up the author, Dennis W. Carroll. I think Shanty's got a couple of those books there somewhere.
I sure do. I sure. We actually still have to do a show with the books, Dennis. I think that's great. Book show, book club. And another thing I was thinking is that we should arrange a Q&A with you. I'm sure there's many viewers who have some very interesting questions.
I love questions. Yeah.
Well, then we do a Q&A with Dr. Dennis Sood. Yay. As the Mormon Church, thank you. The Mormon monarch is what he's referred to as, J.R. Sweet. Gosh, these guys have such insane stories. I mean, it's like, how is that even possible that someone can go through these things that the survivors go through? And you guys come out of there and you still function. Wow. Respect, that's for sure. Anyway, guys, we will see you back, and I'll see you tomorrow on Hangout, and Monday night, a show at 6 o'clock with Danny Henderson and myself. It's Grandma's birthday on Tuesday, so I won't be on Tuesday, but Danny and I will be doing a show on Monday evening. In fact, it's Danny's birthday on Monday the 9th and mine on the 10th. And it's my big, wait for it, 60 this year. Can you believe it? 60, guys. Lots of fun to be had ahead. I look forward. And Dennis, anything else you'd just like to say in wrapping up?
I'll just say, be careful. If you run into any vampires, you know who to call, okay?
Yep. Dr. Dennis. Great, guys. Come celebrate with Daddy and I on and you're so sweet. But I have to say, sometimes you have to put these lights on. They're very kind. You know, these ring lights are very kind to your face sometimes, especially when you haven't slept. Thank you so much, everybody. Come hang out with us tomorrow. Come hang out with us with Jerry Marzinski on Saturday. Come hang out with us at the Sunday Loop on Sunday. Hang out on Monday. You can hang out with me every single day, man. It's so fun. Take it easy, everybody. God bless you all. Be cool, be kind, and be yogi.